Welcome everybody on behalf of the Theosophical Society Point Loma to our weekly Theosophical Talks. Tonight we continue with the theme we started in January of this year, about 18 million years of Theosophia and the last 150 years of Theosophy. Part of this overall theme in this and next month's series is in which we talk about the influence of H.P. Blavatsky's message, her role in transforming the world mentality. And in May, we end the theme talking about the future of her legacy, the message she gave to the world, and what we can and need to do to keep this message alive. This legacy is not just her writings, her many articles and books, as valuable and inspiring as they are, but more than this, by giving her life and her work for humanity, her true legacy is that she opened our souls by showing the true light of the universal wisdom. And this light cannot be compared to anything. It transcends every feeling of happiness and peace we can imagine, for it is life itself with capitals that she showed us. But in order to see and experience that light, we must learn to activate our inner spiritual senses. And this is what we are going to attempt tonight when we will talk about the essence of life, which is Universal Brotherhood. As co-workers of the Theosophical Society Point Loma, we are convinced that Blavatsky's message is of essential value to become familiar with, since this message provides a vision for a practical, a logical, a universal and above all ethical life wisdom that may be of tremendous impact on our future lives. In order to discuss the most essential ideas of her message, to understand the deeper meaning of Universal Brotherhood, it is necessary to recall some ideas from previous lectures, since these core ideas are the keys to understand Universal Brotherhood in its true value. Because Universal Brotherhood is rooted in who and what we essentially are. First of all, it should be remembered that the message, that the theosophy that Blavatsky brought, is not a product of her own intellectual abilities or knowledge of the various wisdom traditions, but the system of teachings and ethics on which Universal Brotherhood is based is the product of generations of thousands and actually even millions of years of continuously research by the forerunners of humanity, consisting of great human beings and those who have even proceeded beyond our human stage. And their field of research is not limited to just men, but includes man and cosmos, particularly the origin, the structure, nature and destiny of life. Not just the outer life of man or any other physical object, but the causal inner life, the true spiritual life. And these elder brothers, as they are called, have penetrated into the very heart of life, the inmost spiritual life that flows or works within and through everything. It is the inner source which is essentially identical in you, in me, and all other life. That is why Blavatsky speaks of the one life being the one reality. Becoming aware of this inner core, the higher self, is not a matter of 5 minutes practice a day, reading a paragraph from a holy book, or meditating for 10 minutes, or doing good deeds for the community. These great sages have spent life after life, in between lives, studying it self-consciously in all its depth and many aspects. They went ever deeper inwards, penetrating into the spiritual divine heart of life that is one in all and every being. They have experienced it, they become one with it to greater or lesser extent. And as they did, they perceived the vast spiritual visions of this boundless life. They came to the realization that manifested life is an illusion, always accompanied by suffering and sorrow. And as they had penetrated behind the veils of external existence, they were able to see through this illusion. They experienced the true one life being the foundation of limited manifested existence. A spiritual, divine experience of oneness, which surpasses all comparison and imagination, for nothing in the material life can possibly compare to it. But instead of entering that exalted state of happiness and peace, they have renounced it. Instead, they returned to test their acquired experiences and insights by applying them, and it is the recording of these verified findings that we now call theosophy. As we discussed in the previous lectures, these great souls are not isolated from each other, but they are united in the great brotherhood called the Lodge of Compassion, Wisdom and Peace. And it is this Lodge of Compassion which has for some 18 million years been ceaselessly active in the background of manifested life. They have joined forces and knowledge to use their acquired insights and understanding for the well-being of humanity. In order to help humanity in its spiritual development, to awaken our divine spiritual core, and to show the true life beyond the veils of physical existence. They work collectively and continuously to emanate the right atmosphere in which we live, develop, and have our existence, so that we, as humanity, stimulated by their inspiration, can realize our self-conscious union with the One Life, the boundless source from which we emanated as unself-conscious God of divine sparks, in order to return as fully self-conscious divine beings. This great evolutionary journey that all beings go offers perspective and gives meaning to life. It is exactly this vision the Buddha had when he saw that all life on its way to reach Buddhahood. The grand evolutionary process Buddhists also describe as the dewdrop returning into the ocean. And these great explorers of the inner life, these great thinkers, you find in the many myths and legends of all cultures and wisdom traditions. They are, among others, called noblemen, chelas, titans, hierophants, initiates, masters or mahatmas, as well as bodhisattvas, buddhas, and gods or dhyani chowans. They have united in the hierarchy of compassion, wisdom, and peace. A spiritual active hierarchy, those great souls have voluntarily joined as they went their evolutionary journey ahead of us. Their fundamental message is that all beings, visible and invisible, from the most spiritual to the most material, are an expression of the one life, equal in essence and inextricably connected. One unity, one living your organism. That is why we find the essence of the message from this hierarchy to be the same in all and every culture. All messengers speaking with one voice about universal brotherhood. They all brought the same liberating message to ignorant humanity that there is a way out of this mire of material deception, a path that leads inward to your inner heart, your own divinity, which is identical to the heart of every being. And it is therefore that universal brotherhood is not a human sentiment or an intellectual treatise or a mere fantasy, but it is a fact in nature based on the spiritual foundation, the oneness of all life. Universal brotherhood is therefore an ethical way of living. You find back in all traditions as the golden rule, the principle of treating others as one would want to be treated by them. Universal brotherhood is the practice of altruism, of forgiveness, of working together, self-forgetful and in loving service of others. All qualities by which the inner life, the innate divinity, is stimulated and activated. And it is exactly this what the hierarchy of compassion and wisdom has been doing unceasingly for 18 million years. They are the guardians of humanity, stimulating harmony and awareness of the oneness in which we live and have our existence. Each time, again and again, when truth about the one life disappears or is mutilated, they ensure that it will be restored. And in their ceaseless work, they don't ask for gratitude. They don't get angry when we mess up. They don't require excuse, don't condemn. They don't exclude anything or anyone. They just do their work for the greater good unconditionally. And although they are largely unknown or misunderstood by Western minds, it is impossible not to mention them when we speak about Universal Brotherhood, because they are the pure expression of it, showing us a proven vision of life, the divine wisdom that gives perspective, meaning, and purpose to life. They are the vital signposts for humanity, showing us the way to our destiny. And the reason we emphasize this is because the message Blavatsky brought to the world has come directly from and through this hierarchy. Blavatsky, being herself one of the signposts sent as a messenger from this great brotherhood. It shows that she and her fellow messengers are but the tip of an enormous iceberg which we cannot perceive by our physical senses, but that radiate compassion and wisdom throughout the cosmos. And it is only in this light that we can truly understand and value Blavatsky's place and task as one of the messengers of the hierarchy of compassion. The environment in which Blavatsky was born and raised, the circumstances and influences she was surrounded by, all not being mere coincidence, but the result of lives of preparation and training to be able to fulfill this task. Blavatsky cannot be understood without considering reincarnation and karma, without the knowledge that we build our character ourselves, that we create our own destiny. It is by all the actions and choices we now make and made in previous lives, that we are attracted to the time and place we are born. All the faculties we have, our strength of character, the people and circumstances we surround ourselves with, all are the result, the karmic effects of our own actions and efforts. In other words, the fact that Blavatsky was an extraordinary soul, gifted with spiritual qualities and faculties, was not just the result of her upbringing. Her environment provided only the right circumstances to express these inner qualities, to open her soul again, and to pick up the thread where she left. From early years on, she showed a strikingly strong character. She had a strong sense of justice and could not stand any injustice. With her inquiring soul and love for truth, she asked all life questions and didn't give up until she had a clear understanding. She loved being in nature because it reflected the inner world, still pure, she said. Her sister Vera writes about her that she was convinced that nature was ensouled and that all things are ensouled, and that she was able to experience and communicate with the inner forces of life. In other words, that Helena Blavatsky was familiar with the inner astral and spiritual world. What important for now is that from birth to adulthood, we can observe the unfoldment of a special character, becoming more and more its true self again in a body named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. We see how she gradually became familiar again with occult powers, which are yet unknown to us. That her attention from early age was more focused on the inner life, the soul of things and people, rather than the physical life and material comfort. At the time the reawakening of her soul was completed, the merely reading of occult books could not satisfy her any longer. An irresistible inner urge arose to go out into the world for further exploration. Still young as she was, she fearlessly went into the world and began her many journeys as independent woman. And in previous lecture series, Johanna Vermeulen took us on all these journeys with Blavatsky. So if you missed those, I can recommend to watch them on our website. But for now, I want to mention that the crucial moment Blavatsky, at the age of 20, met her teacher for the first time in physical life in London. As she later explained, she instantly recognized him as the exact same person she had met before, appearing in her dreams. And by dreams, I don't mean our ordinary dreams at night, in which the average person is unself-aware, but a state of consciousness in which a trained soul, freed from the physical body, is able to be self-consciously active. And it is because of this, being such a trained soul, that allowed Blavatsky to receive spiritual training in her younger years by her teacher, she later met here in London in physical life. During this meeting, her teacher asked her to take upon her a special role on the world stage. A task in which she was asked to convey a message from the Great Brotherhood into the outer world, in which it had to be made known again. But he also told her that it was going to be an arduous task, that it wouldn't bring her any personal merit, a task in which she had to give everything she possibly could. And looking back on her life, we can now affirm that indeed it didn't bring her any personal benefit, but that she had to endure tremendous envy, slander, and betrayal instead, as she sacrificed her life, bringing the message of Universal Brotherhood back into the minds of humanity. And as said before, it requires a great soul of pure and strong character to be able to fulfill this task. A noble soul of altruistic character, persevering, resilient, able to forget itself in working for humanity by the motive of unconditional love and serving truth alone. A quality that took the masters 100 years to find in Helena Blavatsky. And so she was prepared to give up her own life and progress to pass on to humanity the universal message of the hierarchy of compassion and wisdom. She made her own will subservient to that of her teachers, the exact same idea of Jesus saying, "Not my will, but the will of the Father be done." The Father referring to the source of the hierarchy of compassion, wisdom, and peace. It shows the impersonal, unselfish character and absolute altruistic mentality that is required to take on the task of messenger of the Great Brotherhood. The absolute willingness to give oneself for the benefit of the greater whole, being of the exact same characteristic as the Great Lodge of Compassion. As she made the commitment to her teacher, taking on the responsibility, her training journeys over the world began, in which she received the necessary occult training in different wisdom traditions of the different cultures. Eventually ending up in Tibet, where her training was completed, and Blavatsky became the fit instrument, the fully functional link between the inner and the outer world. The link between the hierarchy and the masters and humanity. The necessary link was now established, through which the universal wisdom could flow into the world. The timing of all this, the moment in which Blavatsky came, was not just random or by chance. It had everything to do with a cycle of 2160 years, known as the Messianic cycle. Because with her appearance, Blavatsky initiated such a Messianic cycle, a new era of development. What's important to realize here is that cycles are no mechanical phenomena, no automatically occurring processes, but the habitual patterns, one could say, of our living planet, of further evolved beings governing our planet. Each new cycle is a new evolutionary phase in the living planet we are part of. And for the very reason that we are an inseparable part of our living planet, we are to develop the corresponding characteristic of that cycle within ourselves. And the masters of the hierarchy of compassion, having a deeper understanding of these cycles, attune their message to the new upcoming stage of development. They strike a new tone, so to speak, of the frequency, the characteristic corresponding to the phase to come. Like the principal of a university who at the start of a new year, when all the teachers and students are gathered, opens the year with a message that colors the rest of the coming year, inspiring all students to be optimally prepared to successfully complete and end at the end of that year, ready to move on to the next. In doing so, the principle foreshadows what is to come. And similar to this, in the greater whole, the Great Brotherhood functions the same from the inner worlds. In analogy, the teachers of the Great Brotherhood, impelled by their wisdom and compassion, foreshadow the spiritual curriculum, so to say, for humanity to be followed through in the new cycle. A curriculum of spiritual development in which humanity has the opportunity to move another step closer to its destiny, to the next class in the school of life. In other words, based on their wisdom and knowledge, this great brotherhood anticipates what is to come and makes sure that in everything is foreseen, the teachings and teacher, to initiate and guide the new cycle from growth so that the students, as humanity, can learn their lessons in an optimal way. Blavatsky's arrival is connected with the dawn of the Messianic cycle of the Aquarian Age, and some people, including Theosophists, assign a number of characteristics to this Aquarian Age, such as love, understanding, peace, harmony, and all the positive things you can think of, talking about it as if it is a guaranteed shift in our thinking from the materialistic to a spiritual mentality. But remember, as said, that it is not the new cycle in itself that brings change, as if it were the solution. It only sets a tone, a new frequency of atmosphere of thought that could lead to change, because the actual change has to come from humanity itself, from those who desire to work in accordance with this tone. In other words, the cycle is not a given fact, because nature does not compel or force. Nature only inspires, always respecting the free will. It is up to us whether we want to actively attune ourselves to this inspiration or so we can receive it and start working together in line with it. So what do these teachings consist of, this study material that Blavatsky gave us on behalf of our teachers? First of all, there are no instructions or methods to follow, but living ideas. Ideas that explain the very life itself, of which the first and foremost and most essential idea is the unity of life, one universal life source, one reality that antecedes all manifested or embodied life. Whether an atom, mineral, plant, animal, or human, but also a planet, sun, or galaxy, all that is shares the same essence and is rooted in the same one reality. A reality that is eternal, boundless, and omnipresent. And so, all life, being part of the oneness, visible and invisible, spiritual or material, is equally eternal, boundless in essence. In other words, the essence cannot be killed or destroyed. Everything has always been and will always continue to be. But this first idea of oneness goes further. It also means that nothing is separate from anything else. we literally form one dynamic living organism. And based on this fundamental unity and interconnectedness, we say that Universal Brotherhood is a fact in nature. Nature with a capital N as a boundless and omnipresent field in which all lives, moves and has its being, and in which compassion and harmony are the foundations. These are just the first outlines, a bird's eye view of this first idea, which has an infinite depth to it that is to be discovered by everyone's own effort. The second idea concerns the cyclical motion of life, the idea that the oneness is the playing field in which all life periodically appears and disappears. Like ocean waves emerging on the water surface only to disappear into it again. To our physical senses, these waves appear to be existing on themselves, but in reality they never got separated from the ocean. And similar to the wave, all life periodically emerges from the oneness, seemingly to appear and disappear, because in reality it never gets detached from it. This eternal cyclical motion is like breathing in and out, the ebb and flow of seas and oceans. It is the universal law of re-embodiment or reincarnation, of life alternating from one state of consciousness into another, from a period of activity in the manifested world, followed by a period of rest in the inner realms. And finally, the third idea teaches that there is eternal growth. As above, so below, both on the spiritual and material worlds. It is the idea of evolution, of unfolding or developing what is already latently present within, of the infinite faculties that are yet dormant, waiting to be activated by self-induced effort of each and every being. So based on these three life lessons, these three essential ideas, you can conclude that there is fundamental equality of life. That all life has the same potential, the same essence, only differing in the degree of development and physical expression. And it is this gradually becoming of what we essentially are, in which we find the meaning of life. All life is on an evolutionary path of becoming one with its inner spiritual divine core. In fact, we are already one with it, but our development implies a becoming self-consciously aware of it. In the true meaning of religion, to reunite with the divinity within, the inner divinity that is one in you, in me, and all other life. And it is this very premise of the spiritual oneness of life upon which is stated that Universal Brotherhood is a fact in nature, not as mere sentiment, not as an intellectual theory. It is brotherhood per se. It is a state of consciousness, a state of being one, of realizing one's fundamental unity with life in all its diversity. Hence we read in the voice of the silence that to live to benefit mankind is the first step on the path towards unity. So you see that these three fundamental ideas given by our teachers as the study material for this Messianic cycle are together forming an all-encompassing vision on life. Of these three, not one can be left out. It is only in their interrelation that they offer a logical, universal and ethical vision on life. The fact that we symbolically speak of teaching or study material is because we have to study it, we have to test it and verify the truth of it in our daily life. The teachers even urge us not to blindly accept the ideas on their authority. It is only to the extent we are prepared to investigate them, test them and live by them, that they provide their value, with our daily life being the test. And only when both our mind and heart are satisfied, we are convinced of the truth, the essence and value of the teaching material. But we ourselves have to make the effort to activate what is already within, as all development in nature comes from within. Only by exercising our spiritual faculties of thought, we are able to fathom the message. Studying these ideas, contemplating them, and especially putting them into practice, put into practice the ethical consequence of it, activates the spiritual mental part of our mind, by which we are able to attune and resonate on that tone, the atmosphere that is guiding the new cycle. As self-conscious thinkers, we are able to see with our inner eye the logic, universality, and ethics embodied in these ideas. Universal ideas that are no mere theory, but the very essence of life and therefore the very essence of ourselves. For they explain who we are, where we come from, and what awaits us if we develop our full human potential and become spiritual divine beings, experiencing our unity with all that is. It is this very much needed message of brotherhood finding its way into the world through Blavatsky and her teachers in 1875. Needed because the world mentality around that last quarter of the 18th century threatened to sink completely into materialistic and selfish thinking. The growing popularity of Darwin's theory narrowed down the struggle, or narrowed down to the struggle of existence, and the idea of the survival of the fittest increasingly took hold of man's mind, becoming more and more the leading motive behind our thinking and acting, resulting eventually in a thought atmosphere, a mentality of separateness and selfishness, a mentality called obscurantism as the exact opposite of enlightenment. It was a time in which people were deliberately kept ignorant by the dogmatic church, preventing people to think independently. A thought atmosphere nourished by the established power of aristocracy and the church, a time of arrogance and superiority imbued with selfishness. And it is in this period of narrow-mindedness in which Helena Blavatsky came with her message of universal brotherhood, harmony, and peace. The message of enlightenment by which she brought the spiritual light back into the world. As Blavatsky, when she arrived in America, herself said, to have come back to break the molds of mind. And this is exactly what she did. She brought back the spiritual life to the center of the new world. But of course, this was not an easy task, because where to start reintroducing ideas that are so much contrary to the predominant materialistic vision? But Blavatsky found an entrance in a group of people that were receptive for the idea that there is more than just the physical world. At the time, there was a particular interest for spiritism among different layers of society. The phenomena of mediums being able to contact spirits during the so-called seances in which the mediums were able to make them visible. So for this group, it was a very natural thing to assume that there is more than just the material existence and that there is a spiritual life. However, what the spiritists were not aware of was that the so-called spirits appearing during those seances were not the real human beings that passed away. They were only the empty shells, so to speak, the instinctive energies left of what once were their loved ones. Because the real man, the inner consciousness, has withdrawn to the higher inner realms, impossible to be contacted. So, while having an opening for her message in society, Blavatsky simultaneously had to correct the misconception of the spiritists who were convinced of being in contact with the spiritual world, while in fact it wasn't spiritual at all. Blavatsky was instructed by her teachers to reveal the truth, and as she self said, "I am here in this country, sent by my lodge on behalf of truth in modern spiritualism. And it is my most sacred duty to unveil what is and expose what is not." As you can imagine, this caused much turbulence in the spiritualist movement, eventually resulting in two camps. One distancing themselves from Blavatsky, accusing her for fraud and betrayal, and another camp of well-known spiritists and scientific researchers who recognized that Blavatsky's demonstrations and explanations of the phenomena contained more truth. This last group gathered and, willing to do further investigation for the real cause of the phenomena, they started to actively support Blavatsky. And part of this group were two gentlemen that both played a major role in the foundation of the Theosophical Society and thereby the theosophical teachings and ethics to root in the world. These two gentlemen are William Conduct Judge and Henry Steele Olcott. Olcott was a journalist who reported on the Spiritists' meetings and who had great interest in the occult himself. William Quan Judge was a lawyer, also interested in the occult and visible life, but there was more to it, because Judge said about their first meeting, "It was her eye that attracted me, the eye of one whom I must have known in lives long passed away." And from the moment they met, their long-time established friendship continued, and Blavatsky, Judge, and Olcott were inseparable. Judge not only became a loyal companion of Blavatsky, but being one of the great of the Lodge of Compassion himself, he became her successor when she passed away. Olcott became the first president of the Theosophical Society, having a more practical and organizing role, also known for the tremendous work he did in restoring and popularizing Buddhism in East and West. After Blavatsky came more and more well known by the many articles she wrote, she was instructed by her teachers to found an organization that could function as the instrument through which the inner forces of inspiration of the hierarchy of compassion could flow into the world. And by doing so, forming a center of Universal Brotherhood. An organization everybody could join as a member, regardless background, religion, gender, nationality, education, or whatever status. It was not to be an organization for occult research to satisfy the individual aspirations of its members, but an organization in which the members worked united for the mental and spiritual well-being of humanity. In other words, becoming a living expression of brotherhood. And Blavatsky decided to name the organization the Theosophical Society, since this name exactly entails what it is founded for, to form an active nucleus of brotherhood based on the divine wisdom of the Theosophia. But when we speak of an organization, we are inclined to think of the outer form, a physical building at a certain place, but it is not the type of organization we mean. By organization, we mean a living and souled organism having a spirit, soul, and body. The spiritual part consisting of the teachers of the hierarchy of compassion and wisdom, the soul part consisting of Blavatsky, being the active link between the teachers and the body, the physical part of the organization, consisting of all the members, practically expressing and spreading the ideas. As such, as messenger, Blavatsky was the only direct link between the spiritual world and the physical world. And this is an important thought, because it means that it was not a physical building, but Blavatsky herself, as the soul of the organization, who determined where it was located. And this also means that the Theosophical Society, in order to continue to exist, is in need of a fit soul able to be the link between the hierarchy of compassion and the outer world. The most important prerequisite for this is to keep the theosophical teachings pure, the teachings and principles as they had been given through Blavatsky directly from her teachers. It implies a constant watchfulness so that personal emotions and interpretations would not contaminate and degenerate theosophy. And paradoxically as it may sound, this is exactly what freedom of thought entails, because to keep theosophy pure, to ensure that it does not fall into dogmatism, we have to use our free will and freedom of thought to study, investigate, and test it. Failing to do so by blindly accepting the ideas is the most sure way to fall into dogmatism. Such an attitude is the death to freedom of conscience and freedom of thought. So to prevent this, we should not let theosophy crystallize into rules or creeds or chisel it into stone. And the very best way to avoid this is always going back to the most essential principle, tested and proven on its truth, the unity of life and Universal Brotherhood as the natural consequence. To live the spirit of Universal Brotherhood in everything we do or omit to do. That is, always and everywhere devoting our will to it, our conscience, our sense of justice and sense of truth. Building an ever clearer picture of Universal Brotherhood, of what it means to be truly selfless, loving and respecting all life unconditionally, truly becoming one with it. And by working selflessly, in line with the spirit of the Great Brotherhood, more and more souls will become fit to pass on the message and allow its influence to flow into the world. After the Theosophical Society was founded and a steady growth of members from all layers of society was established, Blavatsky published her first book, Isis Unveiled, that shakes up the world. The book was a first attempt to bring back the ancient wisdom into Western thought where it had been lost. In Isis, she and her teachers give a sketch-like overview of, among other things, the hidden, invisible side of nature, the forces behind the phenomena. It is an overview of all religions and philosophical systems of the ancient traditions. And in addition to this, she provides scientist explanations for all kinds of phenomena that cannot be explained by a pure materialistic view. She introduces teachings like reincarnation and karma, and she gives the keys by which the symbolism of the ancient traditions can be understood. The lost keys that lead to the same universal wisdom, the same source from which all ancient and current philosophical and religious traditions originate. Blavatsky herself said of publishing Isis, Isis was not unveiled, but rents sufficiently large were made to afford flitting glances to be completed by the student's own intuition. In this curry of quotations from various philosophic and esoteric truths purposely veiled, behold our doctrine, which is now being partially taught to Europeans for the first time. So this was her first attempt to introduce theosophy to a wider audience, and the publication gave a huge boost to human thought and conduct. From all walks of life, it attracted independent thinkers, writers, representatives of various scientific disciplines and religions who got inspired by the message of Blavatsky and her teachers. And as their souls were opened by this inspiration, they, in their turn, were able to transmit this inspiration further into the world by their own work and life, as many did. Blavatsky's role, you might say, was to awaken the souls of men, through which the inspiration of the spiritual divine part of each one of us could start to flow. The unveiling of the universal ideas in Isis brought about a certain receptivity in society, after which she was able to further roll out the teachings. Once again, in close cooperation with her teachers, she wrote the Secret Doctrine, this time with the intention to deliver a much more structured and a much more complete work, as she herself said to be only the outline of a few fundamental truths from the secret doctrine of the archaic ages is now permitted to see the light, after long millenniums of the most profound silence and secrecy. One turn of the key and no more was given in Isis. Much more is explained in these volumes. The secret doctrine contains all that can be given out to the world in this century. So here she clearly states that the teachings in the secret doctrine, compared to the earlier publication of Isis, are more profoundly elaborated on. And yet, at the same time, she says, it is only an outline of these fundamental truths. In other words, we have to turn the key of the secret doctrine several more times ourselves in order to fathom them, to enable ourselves to understand the deeper meaning of the universal truths which have not yet been revealed before. The secret doctrine states for good reason that there is no religion higher than truth. It is all about finding truth, not dictated or imposed by others, but independent search for truth by one's own effort, not relying on anything or anyone, but based on our own research. And everybody is capable to do this, since we all have the divine faculties within. And it is by setting the principle of universal brotherhood as our common goal in life, by expressing it, that we can activate these divine faculties and steadily get better in turning the key the right way. Now let's have a look to conclude at some of the changes Blavatsky caused in the world mentality by bringing the message of universal brotherhood. After the founding of the TS in New York, Blavatsky and Olcott went to India. Once arrived, they made many contacts and established friendships with various indigenous groups, which was unusual for the Indians, who were accustomed that people from America or England only interacted with their own kind. But Blavatsky and Olcott, on the other hand, treated the Indians as their equals. Blavatsky strongly acted against the arrogance of the British, who often looked down on the native people with contempt. Without hesitation, she stood up for the helpless without caste, and in doing so, she started a trend that put pressure on the degenerated caste system. She also committed herself to ensure unity and good relations between the different sects and castes, and that children, especially girls, could not be married off until after their adolescence. This all soon resulted in the degenerated caste system to be changed, so that now a Hindu could share a meal together with a Theosophist. In 1882, she founded the Ladies' Theosophical Society in Calcutta, which consisted of a few branches of native women, which truly was a groundbreaking achievement at that time in India. Blavatsky traveled through India a lot in those early years, and everywhere she went, she advocated time and again fraternization between religious groups, emphasizing that the only rivalry between them should concern a rivalry in the doing of good deeds, all under the motto of the Mahajaras of Benares that there is no religion higher than truth. As the work began to bear fruit and its influence continued to spread, Hindus, Parsis, Buddhists, Jews, Mohammedans, and Europeans of different beliefs gathered under the auspices of the Theosophical Society in a fraternal atmosphere. Something that up to then was unheard of, and that could only come to realization because of the theosophical message that all share the same esoteric origin. The presence of Blavatsky and her teachers, the many writings in her journal The Theosophist, caused a real change in India. By showing the Indian people the origin of their traditions, she reconnected them with their own religious source again, which had great impact on society. After she left India and went to Europe, she spent several years training a group of young theosophists through studies on the teachings of the Secret Doctrine. From birth in 1831 until she left this outer world in 1891, Blavatsky's life was a sequence of remarkable events, whereas it was only the beginning of a new Messianic cycle. Her life and work left a lasting impression and continues to inspire people today. Since we are now in the position to look back, we are able to see how things have changed in the world mentality since 1875. Outer change that all started within, with a change in vision on life. As a result, for example, by bringing the Eastern wisdom tradition to the West. Where previously only the Bible was to be found on bookshelves, nearly every household today has a book on Eastern wisdom or other traditions. There's hardly anyone left who has never heard of reincarnation and karma. The dogmatic vision of hell and heaven has lost its ground and no longer imposes fear on society. Neither does the Christian idea that we are eternal sinners, only able to redeem ourselves by devoting ourselves in service to God, and empty churches are being sold to commercial institutions. More and more people start becoming aware, or at least consider it to be a possibility, that we are more than just our body. Although the origin of life is still being looked for in matter by science, slowly small cracks are appearing in the materialistic vision. A growing number of scientists states that the idea of matter being the foundation of life is no longer valid. It is only a matter of time for science to acknowledge that there is no such thing as dead matter, but that everything is life or consciousness. When we participated in the The Hague's Call for Peace conference in 1999, it was attended by more than 2,000 NGOs working for the well-being of humanity in various fields. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted by the UN Committee. In 1875, women in Europe still marched in the streets for the right to vote. Child labor has been abolished. Compulsory education is established. Not yet worldwide, but great progress has been made. Now, we don't want to claim that all progress and everything that has changed for the good is due to Blavatsky's message and the task she took upon herself. Maybe not, but she undoubtedly contributed to a different spiritual light that started to shine in a time of obscuration. She has envisioned for us the first contours of a heaven on earth. And with the rising urge of intellectual and moral freedom, after centuries of obscuration and repression, we now have the freedom to make our choices ourselves. Blavatsky has provided us the time-tested tools to prepare our garden, to skillfully remove the weeds and sow the spiritual seeds of Universal Brotherhood, that will germinate by our care and devotion. Always keeping in mind that she, as a messenger sent by her teachers, ushered a new era, a new Messianic cycle of which only the first 150 years are behind us. Since her appearance, generations of souls have incarnated, who may yet have to come in contact with Theosophy. And therefore it is also the main priority of the Theosophical Society Point Loma to keep the message alive, to keep the teachings pure and accessible to everyone and with all means at hand. Her life and work testifies that it is also possible for us, regardless our background, nationality, education or religion, to express the common goal of universal brotherhood. Looking back now, we can say that Blavatsky has ushered a fundamental period of transition, which is still in full swing and certainly not has reached its peak yet. And each one of us can contribute in keeping her message alive, a message of hope, a message of enlightenment, and the true meaning of life, so that the ideal of universal brotherhood as a fact in nature becomes a living ideal in the world. That was the lecture. We will have a short break now of 3 minutes. And after the break, we continue with the study on Zoom. So if you are watching on YouTube and you want to join the study, then please send an email to info@blavatskyhouse, and then you are welcome to join. So see you in a few minutes. Hi, Annie.
Hi, hi.
Do we have any questions before we start? Okay.
There are no questions, no.
Then I suggest we go to the study. Yeah, I think that I then close with the Gayatri now. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection stimulated by thine own radiant light.